Welcome to the Leading Moms podcast, where every mom has a story. Our aim is for each mom to recognize her significance and belonging, gain a sense of mastery, and be impactful in her business, community, or the simple everyday of her family. And now, here's your host, Christine Pilkington, founder of Leading Moms.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Moms. If you happen to miss the last episode, our inaugural episode, be sure to catch a listen to that. Alexandra Greenhill, a tech physician, she talks about the benefits and the reasons why, as moms, we should be reaching out and asking for help. Not only does it help us out, but if we're worried about imposing on people or offending people, we shouldn't be worried about that because in actual fact, people feel good when they're helping us out. So if we can give that little gift to someone, we're actually doing them a favor. So I thought that was kind of clever. Today's speaker, Marnie Goldenberg, she's otherwise known as the Sexplainer, and she delivered her talk in 2014. I personally know Marnie. She's a mom in my neighborhood, and she hosts these incredibly informative salons in people's homes that just really give you a new perspective of how to talk to your child about sex. I consider myself a sex positive person, I think. And I see my friends who have the same attitudes. They believe that their children should be informed about topics relating to sex. And even still, I found these salons were always enlightening from the perspective that people are indeed a little bit squirmish about sex and also are at a loss and need a little bit of help on how to really talk about kids and sex. So before this talk, I'd only ever thought about talking about sex from that perspective of biology. This is how it's done. You use a penis, there's a vagina, blah, blah, blah. But the thought of explaining that, to my kids that people actually have sex because it feels good, that was a bit foreign to me. And so in her talk, Marnie Goldenberg broke it down for all of us at Leading Moms.
I really like talking about sex, and I really like talking about sex. Are you with me? Because I love the idea of young people knowing about their bodies and what their bodies are capable of doing. I had a bunch of things prepared to talk about, and I've thrown them all away because of everything people have said this morning. The women who spoke between 8:30 and now, everybody has changed things that I wanted to talk about. So what I want to talk about is really about how sex is a part of our lives from the very beginning to the very end. And we keep that from kids. And we keep it from kids because we carry a lot of shame around sex and sexuality that I think gets in our way. And it really sets our kids up to have a life that isn't as empowered as it can be, because really at the heart of sex and sexuality is power and autonomy. It's about having control. It's about seeking what you want. It's about pleasure. Kind of pulling out, rather than my mom cred, I'm gonna pull out my mom's cred. So I'm gonna tell a story about my mom because she's amazing. And I always thought that I continue to think that I was raised by a fairly sex positive mom. I was pretty lucky. I felt like she was pretty open-minded with me and respectful. And we've had conversations now that I do this for a living where she's in her 70s now. And she's like, I kind of screwed it up. Like there was just so many times when I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what the story was that I needed to share with you because I just hadn't had any lessons. There was no role modeling for me as a parent talking about sex and sexuality. And I think that is true for so many of us. So actually I haven't done this in a while, but a little kind of survey in the crowd, and people can look around. How many of you had good conversations with a parent or both parents about sex and sexuality? Raise your hands. You can look around. Raise them high. High and proud. All right. Now, and among those who put up your hands, how many of you had parents who spoke openly about masturbation? About 4. Right. So this is really a part of it. So now my mom, so the whole idea of what I wanted to talk about today was about not just telling our kids about sex, because I think we can all agree that giving our kids information about sex and sexuality is important. But I actually think that what we need to share with them is that sex is good, right? Not just like, people have sex to have babies, and this is how our bodies work, and this is what menstruation is. These are all important things. We need to talk to them about consent. We need to talk to them about sexually transmitted infections and all sorts of things. But we need to tell them really explicitly that sex is good. So here's an example of where my mom did have the language. I was watching Sex with Sue Johansson, anybody? So a little Margaret, I loved Margaret, but I love Sue Johansson, and I wanted to have a show. It was going to be called Messing with Marnie. There's still time, I might do that. And I was watching that show. It was like cable TV in Toronto, and I was watching that show. My mom came in and sat down, and a woman called into Sue and said, "I'm really embarrassed, but I really like to be on top with my husband, and I don't know how to let him know, and I'm really embarrassed." And my mom was like, "It's the best." And I was just like, and so here's the thing. I don't think we need to tell our kids that we have good sex. But I would be really pleased if children would guess that about us. And I think everybody knows those stories of like kids who do that, like they find out what sexual intercourse is, and then they say things like, "My parents would never do that." Right? Or the kid who finds out what intercourse is and says, "My parents did it 3 times." Right? We need to do better than that. We need to do way better than that. We need to let our kids know that they can like their bodies, that their bodies can give them pleasure. And one of my things, so I go into schools, I talk to kids in schools, and that's all great and fine. This is from a fantastic book. There's an author named Robbie Harris. Yeah, write that down. It's on my website. She is extraordinary, and her books are fantastic. And this is amazing. Look, hello, everyone. This is for 4-year-olds, this book, 4-year-olds. So when we limit the conversations we have to our kids, that sex is for reproduction, which is really, people get a little stressed out about that, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have to say penis in vagina. Like, they fall over. So not only do we need to feel brave and say penis and vagina to our kids, but we need to say, "'cause it feels good," not just 'cause it makes babies. And when we forget how important it is to use words that talk about pleasure, the possibility is, number one, we only equate sex with penis and vagina intercourse, which of course is the tip of the iceberg for what is sex, sexuality, sexual pleasure. It also means we limit sex to heterosexual sex. It also means we limit sex to sex with another person of the opposite sex, never by ourselves. And it actually, when you talk about reproduction, you do not have to mention this word, which I think as a room full of women, it's a pretty important part of our bodies. In fact, it is the only known part of the body that exists for no other reason than for pleasure. And I think, why wouldn't we tell that information to our kids? Why wouldn't we? If sex is good, which I fundamentally believe it is a force of good in the world, why wouldn't we be sharing that with our kids? Why wouldn't we be sharing with them that sex is a way of feeling incredibly close with another person? Why wouldn't we want to let them know that it helps you go to sleep or helps you wake up, right? Why wouldn't we want to know that? Why wouldn't we want them to know that it feels really good? Now, people might say like, well, of course I want my children to know that, but my kid's 2 or my kid's 4 or my kid's 14 or 16. Eventually I'll get there. But here's the thing. There's a couple reasons why I think it's extraordinarily important for young kids, like preschoolers, to learn and hear messages, like verbalized messages from their parents that sex is good. One is because it is good. Fundamentally, it is good, right? Number 2 is that young kids are really curious and they are shame-free. They have no baggage about sex and sexuality. So if we message that it is good, that it is healthy, that's a force of good, right? That it'll teach them things about themselves, that will help them express themselves in the world, that it'll help them feel close to people. That's a good message, and they're going to be really open and receptive to it. It is developmentally appropriate that they become less receptive to it when they hit 10, 11, 12, 13. That's likely to happen. So why not start when they're open? And the last reason why I think it's really important for us as parents to share these kinds of messages is because if we don't, who the hell will? Right? We live in a time and in a society where people and products sexualize everything. It makes sex into a bad thing. I mean, at the very least, it's confusing, and at the very worst, the messages are downright negative and self-loathing. So if we're going to switch the message for our kids that sex isn't hedonistic and depraved, then we need to do that for them. I have 1 minute. Okay, so I should tell a story because I actually said to Natalia I was going to tell a story. So I was in the bath with my kid. This was a few years ago, and he was maybe almost 7, and he was sitting in front of me, and we were both facing the same direction as his hands were in his lap. And he said, "Mommy, do you think I have an erection right now?" And I said, "Yes, I think you have an erection right now." And he said, "I do, but when I first asked that question, I didn't." So, that's an interesting thing. So I said, I'm not entirely surprised to hear that because when penises are touched, they often become erect. And then I said, older boys and men will often touch their penis on purpose to make it erect. And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "They find that it feels really good." And he thought, and he said, "Okay, but it doesn't always feel good to have an erection." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, it's really hard to pee when you have an erection." And I said, "Oh, I've heard that." So this is like a great example of infusing the spirit of sex positivity into everyday conversations with our kids. We have opportunities when we listen to music with them, when we're toileting, like teaching them to use the toilet, when they're in the bath and you're naming body parts. Don't forget vulva, don't forget scrotum, don't forget penis and anus. Say labia, say it proud. These are absolutely the places where our kids learn the right kinds of messages about sex and sexuality that will truly carry them through the rest of their lives. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leading Moms Podcast. Did you know the success of our podcast relies on reviews from our listeners? To leave a review, visit leadingmoms.ca/review. Until next time.